Escorts of Reddit, what was your first day of work like? Story 1. Throwaway for obvious reasons, but I'm an actively working girl. My first time was only about a month ago. It was through a website where you make offers to pay a girl to go on a date with you. They had to be very clear that it wasn't a prostitution website. You compensate for time, it said, many times, but banging was fairly well implied. My first time was with a 43-year-old married man in town on business. He contacted me about a week prior through the website offering $80 for a date. He said he would give me $2,000 a month for regular banging if we liked each other. I said yes, and he told me which hotel to meet him at and when. He also told me what to wear. I arrived and he wasn't too bad looking. Slender and way more tan than you'd normally see as far north as I am. He bought me a drink first at the hotel bar and we talked for a bit. I was unbelievably nervous, but he was fairly reassuring. I was sure everyone there knew what I was there for, and I was terrified of anyone calling me out. Eventually, he suggested we would go up to his room, and I just gave the meekest okay that has ever passed my lips. We went up and sat on the bed and chatted a bit more before he kissed me. After a couple seconds, he pulled back and said, "I like the way you do that. Let's take off your clothes and see what else you do well." I got naked and gave him a blowy. I wasn't really expecting him to finish that way, but he did. After that, he laid back on the bed and indicated I should join him, so we snuggled and talked a bit more. Eventually, he told me that he thought I was funny and sweet and too good at that, and that he didn't want to see me again in case he formed an emotional attachment. He said he just wanted banging. He didn't want to mess things up with his wife. I said that was fine and we talked some more. Eventually, I started putting my clothes on. I was waiting for him to give me some money, but he wasn't making any moves in that direction, so I sat and talked with him a bit longer. Eventually, I reminded him that we had agreed on $80 for the date and he acted all surprised. Then he made a show of looking for his wallet and counted out each bill and dropped it on the bed as he did. I took it and left, not accepting his offer to call me a cab. I felt pretty gross, but my later experiences were better. We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description. Story 2. My first job was a private client, and I was totally calm on my way there and during. It wasn't until I got into a cab to go home that I started crying. I wasn't even upset, it was just involuntary. A month later, I joined an agency. My first night, they gave me this guy who became my first regular. Always booked half an hour, and I never stayed longer than 10. The other job of the night was in an office in an old industrial estate. 2 very married men and another escort. She was really nice and reassuring and helped me get over the initial embarrassment. The rest of the night was just sitting in the car with my driver talking about World War II and listening to Frank Sinatra. Most of the time I even got fun, but I still had butterflies on the drive there. I think it was the anticipation of not really knowing who the guy was. They could be sincerely nice or they could just be a complete jerk. Story 3. I was an independent escort for 4 years. My first night, I was ridiculously nervous. I went to an upscale hotel, nervously walked through the lobby, hoping I looked like I belonged there and not what I was really there for. I was nervous the whole elevator ride up to his room. I walk to his room, lightly knock on the door, he opens the door and says, for the story's sake, we'll use the name Sarah. Hi, Sarah? And like an idiot, I reply with my real name. We laughed it off. It was quick, 10 minutes. He was polite and clean, in the area for business. I ended up seeing him a few more times over the years, always very nice. He tipped on top of the hourly rate, which was always appreciated and made me choose to see him over other clients in the future. Story 4. My first and only time as a male escort, I didn't even realize that I was. I used to hair model from time to time for wedding photographers and hair salons, so I have a few headshots floating around on different modeling websites and stock images. One day I got an email from a photographer that said he was practicing drawing and he needed a nude male model to practice form. He said that he had a studio he could book and would pay $100 for 2 hours. I was saving up for a plane ticket to come home to surprise my parents for spring break, so figured this would be an easy way to make a connection in the art industry as well as pick up some cash. We agreed on a time, he gave me his number, and we talked on the phone to voice verify, as well as the studio that we would be working at. When I arrived at the location, he was waiting there and said that the studio had been booked out for the night, so he asked if I wanted to grab some food and then head to a hotel so we could just pose and draw there. I agreed. We had dinner, made small talk about church and what I was studying at my university, and eventually got a cheap hotel room in downtown Nashville. Eventually, I got naked, and he asked if I thought I could get a hard-on so he could draw it. I said, maybe, and he asked if he could help. I declined at first and tried to get one, but eventually he said that he wanted to help and came over and just started jerking me off. I didn't know what to do, as he was significantly bigger than me. I started to try to get up, but he laid on me and wouldn't move. He kept saying shh and told me that everything was going to be okay and he would get me back to my dorm in an hour. I gave up struggling and he gave me a blowy while he laid on me and kept me down. I was so scared that I nut in about 2 minutes. I didn't say anything as he got up, tossed me my clothes and said, "Let's get you home." He He drove me home in silence, and as I started to get out of the car, he grabbed my arm and said, "I hope that was fun for you too. I'll let you know if I need any more fun in the future," and dropped two 50s on the seat. I went back to my dorm and cried, not knowing if I had just become an escort or got assaulted. Sometimes I get contacted by him and got a couple messages from him while he was drunk, but I just ignore them and try to forget about it. Narrator's note: you got assaulted, dude. Yikes. Story 5. This sounds awful, but I was so desperate for money that I posted on Craigslist. Obviously, that was stupid and dangerous, but I was 17 and I didn't think about it. I basically asked people to bid to see who I would go with. Keep in mind, this was a suburb in the Midwestern US, so the money wasn't crazy. I ended up driving 45 minutes to meet a guy who then drove me to his house. Again, so stupid. I can't believe I didn't die that night. This dude was like 50. Heavy cigarette smoker, smelled like booze. I told him I was 19. So stupid again. The guy paid me $60 an hour for 3 hours. He smoked a few bowls, talked about jazz, then very creepily went on and on about my breasts. I jerked him for like 30 minutes with this horrible rose-scented lotion, blew him, and eventually we banged. I was honestly impressed he could get it up with how high he was and figured he must be on something else. That was mostly what I was thinking about the whole time. I didn't feel it when he finished because I was too concerned trying to give a good performance. A little awkward, but he didn't seem to notice. When I got off him, there was no rubber on his dong and I freaked out until I realized it was just still inside of me. We hung out for a little while, read He Slept and I Tried Not to Puke, and then he took me back to my car, filled up my tank, and gave me $300. All in all, not a horrible first experience, but not wonderful. He's also called me a few times, but I never went back. Story 6. I started working because I'd gotten a few propositions through a dating website. I was studying med at the time and I was short on money. So one time this guy made me what seemed like a lucrative offer and I agreed. I didn't know how any of it worked, so I told a friend I was going out and to call or text me in an hour's time. We initially met in a park at night, sat in his very, very nice car, had a bit of a flirty chat, then made an appointment. He said he was 58, but I think he was a good 15 or 20 years older than that. A week or two later, I drove over to his apartment. I was petrified, but I needed the money, so I rang the doorbell. It was a lovely apartment and he paid up front. He was nice enough. He asked me to do some things that I didn't want to do, so I said, maybe not this time. I kept an eye on the time via the helpful clock radio next to the bed, and thankfully he finished on time. Had a shower, a bit of a chat afterwards, then he kissed me goodbye on the cheek. I think the fact that I said no to rimming annoyed him a little, but he texted later and asked if I would like to do a threesome with another working girl. Things proceeded from there. Story 17. When I was 18, I was tight on cash and decided, screw it. I need a sugar daddy. I went on Craigslist and found a guy. He wanted to meet me first and needed a new girl to replace his old one. He was willing to pay 4 figures per date. I drove to meet him and was stuck in traffic on the way for an hour or two. I sat at Starbucks for a while waiting. He got lost because he was only there on business. I was shaking by the time he came. We got burgers and drinks and sat at a table waiting for everything, talking. He was sweet, but not my type. I was so nervous and still shaking. We got to his hotel and sat and talked and ate, then started getting frisky. He would not stop talking about how amazing I looked and was, and I know he was just trying to flatter me, but after a while, it got really old. I stayed the night and left in the morning. He gave me money for gas. I later told him sorry, but the age difference felt too weird and he would have to find another girl. But really, I just couldn't stand him. Then I found this married guy. We talked, I sent him pictures of myself, and he was hooked. He ordered things off Amazon for me to bring. We're talking bondage kind of stuff. Butt stuff was on the list of necessities to him. I hadn't done it before and was really hesitant about it. I told him I wanted to be blindfolded for the thrill of it, but really, I just didn't want to see his face. Drove an hour to a motel in his town to see him. The way everyone looked at me, I knew they knew what I was there for. I knocked on the door, it opened. I stepped inside where the lights were off, kept my eyes to the ground. He came up to me and started stroking my arms, my face, and he instructed me to put the blindfold on, and I did. I hated it. I hated every minute of it. It was painful and I cried. I could feel his fat slapping against my stomach. He kissed me with his bushy beard tickling my face and I just freaking hated it. I wanted to vomit. He gave me $400 and I left. I cried all the way home. He was nuts about me, wanted to take me on trips and buy me an apartment in his town and all that. I agreed to meet him again, but no butt stuff and no kissing. I told him that it felt weird to kiss him when he had a wife. I know, what a lame excuse, but what was I supposed to say? You disgust me? The second time, he was coked out and had a hard time keeping it up. I had to awkwardly console him while he beat himself up over it and suck on his flaccid dong several times. We laid together for a while and we had a bit of banging. Like, without a full hard on, it's pretty much a fail. Once he gave up on the whole thing and admitted defeat, I packed everything up and sat at the edge of the bed. He brought my money and placed it in my hands and told me to look at him. I was still wearing the blindfold and I shook my head. He took it off of me and told me to look at him. He was wearing a bandana that covered most of his face except for his eyes. He had lovely eyes, and it made me want to cry when I thought of his wife. This dude was convinced that I wasn't in it for the money, that I had a sick mind, a dirty side, and only he could fulfill it. I didn't bother correcting him because I didn't want to kill the self-esteem he was building for himself. I told him I couldn't do it anymore. He messaged me a few times over the years, but I kept telling him no matter what price he offered. I regret both encounters to this day, and nobody else knows about it. Story 8. Just after high school, my girlfriend got a job as an escort. It was when pagers were cool, for reference. I dropped her off at work on her first night. The place was in a strip mall, just a little spot that looked like a half-empty travel agency or an insurance shop. It was out calls only, so basically you wouldn't know it was an escort service. I hung out in town because she said she'd page me if she needed me to come get her. She paged me pretty quick. I picked her up and we drove to a McDonald's and got coffee. She was a wreck. She said that she told them she was going on a break, but that she wanted me to take her home. She wasn't even going to get paid. She went on an out call to a guy's house. They had bouncer-like guys to drive the girls places, and so a guy drove her to some guy's house and waited outside in the car. The customer obviously wanted to bang, and she was totally blindsided by this. I honestly don't think that she knew what she was doing. She just thought it was going to be a go out on the town for a date kind of escort. She even wore one of her nicest dresses. Long story short, she ended up just watching the guy jerk it before fleeing the place and getting driven back to the office. Then I picked her up and she never went back. The thing I remember most clearly was when she was describing it to me. She was disillusioned, incredulous. There were pictures of his wife on the walls, pictures of his family. She was a great gal. FYI, from what I know via Facebook, she went to university, traveled the world, has a beautiful family and a successful career. Happy ending. Story 9. No longer an escort. Only saw a few clients and decided that I'd rather make money the normal way, but here's my first experience. Signed up to an escort and cam girl site. My partner couldn't accompany me to the meet, so I got my gay best friend to drive me. It was in a travel lodge. Classy, and I was super nervous. I'd asked him if there was anything in particular he wanted me to wear, and he said that he'd wanted me in casual clothes and no makeup. Of course, guys don't really have a clue what girls look like without a stitch of makeup on, so I put on foundation, blush, and mascara and a cute sundress. The guy was around 50. I was 20 at the time and mainly wanted to make out and cuddle. For some reason, he had covered himself in talcum powder, which was odd. And he wasn't attractive, which made it hard for me to get aroused, but he seemed very happy. The thing that weirded me out a little was he kept talking about how young I was and asked me for my real name several times. I had a fake name for obvious reasons. I was reluctant to give him my real name and instead just gave him a second fake name. I told him my real name was Elizabeth, but my friends called me Lizzie, and he called me Lizzie for the remainder of the appointment. Then had the cheek to try and haggle me down for an extra hour, which I declined. Afterwards, when I was 300 quid richer for an hour of work, I felt strangely empowered. Story 10. I was 22, just graduated with a BA in a major that would make me no money. Moved in with my parents and was on a downward spiral. I posted on Craigslist, $400 an hour. I had no idea about the rates and still don't, but from this thread it seems high, and met a man the next night at his house for an agreed upon 30 minutes. We sat on the couch and talked a little bit. He ran a small business, divorced, overweight, 40s, really ordinary and quite nice, actually. He took me into the bedroom and there were lit candles and a bottle of lube on the nightstand. I wouldn't kiss him for a while, but he seemed lonely, I guess. I eventually did. Stupid, probably. He put a rubber on and I blew him for a while, but he didn't stay hard consistently. I climbed on and rode him and he didn't nut by the time the 30 minutes were up. I liked him, so I kept going until he finished. Maybe another 20 minutes? I didn't charge him for the extra. I didn't enjoy it as much as I would with a regular partner, but it wasn't bad. After we finished, he thanked me and we hugged. He suggested that he could make a spaghetti dinner next time and we could eat and get to know each other. It wasn't as bad as I had expected and I wasn't traumatized, but I never did it again. I'm not sure why. He texted me several times after and eventually I just told him I'd moved. Story 11. I was 35. I'm fit, tall, long brown hair, and eyes that shift from blue to green, in good shape from bicycling. I have a PhD in linguistics and a master's in literature, and I'm male. I was in between employment and talking in a philosophy-oriented discussion forum on the internet with some friends I had made there. I had discussed at length the importance of Jung's notion of the shadow in Proto-Indo-European myth cycles, and was privately messaged by a woman who had not taken part in the discussion but had followed it with interest. She is practicing as a Freudian psychoanalyst in a large American city, and we discussed the tensions between Freud's and Jung's approaches, and the nature of the shadow and interrogation. We began discussing intimate proclivities, and then, of course, it turned to our own. We shared several compatibilities, and she confessed that she wanted to explore some kinky fantasies that she had, and wondered if I would write her some erotic fiction on a number of themes. I agreed, and she enjoyed them immensely. We talked more in depth over the course of the month, did some cyber stuff, swapped pictures, and so forth. A month after we first talked, she offered to fly me to her, put me up in a hotel for 2 weeks, and pay me a sum of money to act out her fantasies with her. I considered it. She insisted on it being a business arrangement so that she wouldn't catch feelings, in not such exact terms, and also because of the rather intense nature of her fantasies. For reference, buying a love slave was part of them. I finally agreed. 2 weeks of the utter legal limits of debauchery, aside from the exchange of money for companionship and services, ensued. Banging while reciting poetry, banging while drunk, banging in public, banging at a private party with an audience, domination, submission, roleplay, on the roof of a high-rise in a thunderstorm, half expecting to die of a lightning strike, all resulting in waking up tired, sore, bruised, and mildly dehydrated, as that was the norm. I tied her up, suspended her in a web of ropes, and thrummed them with a cello bow until she finished from the sensation and the verbal accompaniment. She placed a rather vicious dog's choke collar on me, chained me, and proceeded to entice and humiliate and tease me for hours, until I was slavering and manic to ravish her, and only then she tugged open the knot, securing me from acting on my impulses. Far darker things we did as well. Over times, we had a few more instances of meeting up for banging, but we inevitably had developed feelings for each other and so discontinued the business end of that arrangement. I had used the money to start a business and gave her back every penny she gave me, and we agreed that we'd finally consider it just an interest-free loan. Some of what I wrote for her and that we wrote together has since been published under a pen name with little commercial success. She considers me her last hurrah. She went through menopause shortly after our last visit together, and now she doesn't have the same drive. I have never involved money in an intimate relationship before or since. And honestly, none of the other relationships I've had compared in intensity or raw honesty with the experience we spent together. We stripped each other's souls bare and bleeding, and know one another more intimately than anyone else could know us. Story 12. I was in the adult entertainment industry for 12 years. It started with stripping, then adult videos, then escort work. I was already used to men that only want one thing from me, so it wasn't that big of a deal for me. Until I was on my way to my first out call. I had prepared for hours, making sure I was at my best. Carefully shaving and applying soft-scented body lotion, making sure that I was all that had been advertised. I put on my most provocative dress and checked in the mirror to make sure all was just perfect. I did not look myself in the eye. The hotel I was driven to was not the agreed-upon place. It was much cheaper and seedier, but it was too late for me to turn back. There were bills to be paid. As I entered the room, I could feel my soul shutting down. In retrospect, I really appreciate my ability to do that. I was able to go through the motions of being exactly what the client wanted me to be. I've been the soft lover, the frisky, crazed girlfriend, the dominatrix, the submissive, and sometimes the mother to many men. Even 20 years later, I regret that I would put my own well-being on the line just for a few $1,000s at a time. Some people can do this type of work. Others cannot. I am now happily married with a career that I'm good at, but I'm plagued by my decisions to hurt the girl that I was, just to get ahead on my bills and life. I hope that all works out for you, OP. Story 15. My ex-friends with benefits / girlfriend is an escort and she got into it accidentally. She was an art student so agreed to model for a photographer. After a while, he offered to pay her more if she stripped. Since she's been drinking to get over the nervousness of modeling, she thought, meh, why not? Then he started making moves on her and she went, stop. You're not paying me for that. He thought she meant she wants to get paid for banging and made a crazy huge offer. She took it, had fun, and became an escort full-time. I know she gets paid a lot because one of her clients wanted to meet me. Unfortunately, she talks about me to her clients since at one point we were in a serious 3-way polyamorous relationship, and offered to pay each girl close to $2,000. He was also in finance, so no. He was even trying to guess which bank I was working for, and it turns out he had done a brief stint in the bank I was in. It's a big bank, so it's very common. I was already having problems with harassment while working in the bank, and I don't need more. And yes, he only wanted to watch. Apparently, he got off from voyeurism.